Blue, hills are blue. Tell everybody around the place I is blue. Hello, Kingfish, come on in.
Amos and Andy certainly filled the image. Amos was the nice, easygoing character, the Tom image. Andy Brown was the clown. He was oafish. He chased women. He never worked. A little later in the series, they developed George Kingfish Stevens, who was a cheat, sort of a rascal who was always out to con his friends at the Mystic Knights of the Sea Lodge Hall. We had Lightning, a janitor, who was a dim-witted, easy, lethargic type. And all of them were played by white men.
Well, there's Andy asleep again. Andy, wake up. Andy.
Fresh Air Taxi Cab Company. President speaking.
Andy, wake up. The phone ain't ringing. You asleep.
I ain't been asleep.
Hello, boys. How is you?
Hello, Kingfish.
Well,
Boys, I got the greatest deal for you that you don't ever hear of in your life.
This was one of the award-winning shows at the time, and it is one that broke the ice for us because the acclaim that came was so overwhelming that the resistance from the administration, from NBC, telling us to slow down, to ease up, to not talk against discrimination so much, or not portray characters who were so bold and so cocky. Some of them were cocky.
They wanted their revolution to make all men free and equal. But they stopped with some men free and some men slaves. I took up where they left off. I found my price when I was a slave. I paid it. If my life is the price I pay to be free, take it. I'll pay it. But until all men are free and equal, the revolution goes on.
Although 65% of the American population cannot remember life before the start of the television era in 1948, broadcasting did exist before then. It was and is called radio. And like its twin electronic sister, television, it has come a long way in eradicating racial stereotypes. Before this program is over, I believe you'll know what I mean. You'll also know what one black man did about it. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, 1980 on your...
My rhymes create life like the birds and the bees. Make funk master flex say, yo, I'm feeling these. Flows make your shit in the jaws, change your dungarees. Smoke trees, getting cotton mouth, wild munchies. Bounce down the block, eat food at Luigi's. Ass constipated, too much extra cheese. But anyway, when I was cooling down at Luigi's, I met some Siamese twins from overseas, Lebanese. Lesbian with friends from New Orleans. They had a fifth friend, she was straight black Portuguese. Pretty palm olive, soap skin, aloe vera leaves. She looks like the type of chick you only see in fantasies. The type of chick that you kill for to get between the knees. I make time to chill with Miss Portuguese. Would you believe the bitch tried to steal my fucking house keys? Robbed me for my G's. Had to show this crazy broad I mastered my degrees and my PhDs. Got your face on camera, motherfucker, say cheese. You better get with your friends quick before I start to squeeze. Getting caught up in them freaky gold digger jamboree. I caught the ill vibe tip. Word buzz. Yo, word. The ill vibe tip. Your word buzz. Yo, word. Cause when I'm in the place, you know my shit be absurd. I caught the ill vibe buzz. Word tip. Yo, word. The ill vibe buzz. Word tip. Yo, word. Yo, when I hold the mic, you know my shit be absurd. I caught the ill vibe buzz. Word tip. Yo, word. On my shoulders in the form of this beat. Ain't nothing sweet on the street for good deeds I compete. Come on, complete and unique, so get back in your stance. We enhance and we blatant the whole world circumstance. So do good in your hood even though you puff fly. Positive to comply. Don't screw face and act right. Progress, don't fall back. We can't have that. I hold your hand black. We can't wind up with scratch. I put my best foot forward when I play it life. Cause this world is bound to get you like a double-edged knife.
in the gym, we regulate, cause we organize, logically thinking with a law's enterprise. A lot of brothers from the ghetto got the gift of gab. Peace to the west coast and the east, we fab. Oh, need I make mention that the crew we got make things get hot like a fofo shot. Blah. No, we don't promote no guns, but don't turn that cheek. In the world that we live, kindness is viewed as weak. So we gotta stay on point for all these lizards and snakes. Some of them come as friends, some of them come as jakes. We decipher all the flaws and build grounds with our friends. Why's that? So we can live right until time ends. Yo, why's that? Amalgamate so we can get these ends. Yo, true that. Buster and Tip, you know we make minds bend. I caught the ill vibe bus.
Word tip.
Yo, word. The ill vibe bus.
Word tip.
Yo, word. Yo, when I hold my mic, you know my shit be absurd.
I caught that ill vibe tip.
Yo, word bus.
Yo, word. That ill vibe tip.
Say word.
Yo, word. Cause when I'm in the place, you know my shit be
I caught
absurd.
that ill vibe bus.
Word tip.
Yo, word. That ill vibe bus.
Word tip.
Yo, word. Yo, when we in the gym, you know the shit be
I
absurd.
caught that wow shit tip.
Word bus.
Yo, word. The ill vibe tip.
Say word.
Yo, word. Cause when I'm in the place, you know my shit be absurd.
McDonald, no one has ever done anything in terms of publishing information on blacks in radio. You have an entire chapter in your book on that subject. You break it down, the stereotypic treatment of black Americans, into basically 3 periods. What are those periods?
Yes, I think we can talk about up till World War II as being a consistent historical period. The Second World War is a phase in itself and a very important transition period. And then we can talk about the post-war world, where things begin to change rather dramatically.
What about the first period?
I think in the first period we deal with what we traditionally think of in other media as well as radio as being the typical image of blacks as projected through traditionally bigoted media. They tended to have black actors portray characters who were somewhat foolish, somewhat frenetic, mammy-type images. We had the typical comedic, what they call the coon image, who was mendacious. He was a liar. He was always out to cheat somebody. He was never working, sort of a social indolent. Then we have sort of the Tom image, that is the church-going, rational type of almost socially subservient black image. And when actors portrayed these, they tended to be white actors in general, because in radio, you didn't have to see the person who was actually doing the voice. And since there was a strongly established image of how blacks sounded, coming out of the minstrel shows of the 19th century, out of vaudeville in the first part of the century, of the 20th century, that we tend to have the ability then for white actors to play these roles.
Come on, Brother Andy, I want you to meet your trainer. Brother Hercules, this is Andrew H. Brown. Glad to know you, Mr. Brown.
Excuse me for tripping you up.
This is Amos Jones.
I'm glad to know you, Miss Hercules.
The United States Commission on Civil Rights, in a recent report, warned that the roles of blacks in television situation comedies largely fixes an image in the public mind as a ridiculous and non-serious people. The presentation of blacks or other minorities in television drama is rare, according to historian Eric Barlow, because producers are in the business of entertaining their audience and do not want to move them too deeply. Another theory is that serious blacks make the commercials seem inappropriate, and programs that make advertising seem inappropriate in the eyes of the broadcasters do not make good advertising vehicles. We still have more questions than answers. To what extent do black and white viewers identify with major black shows? How do blacks and whites perceive the role of blacks in American society? One study even concluded that blacks experience more difficulty than whites in distinguishing between television and real life. Amos and Andy, a situation comedy, grew from radio in August 1929 to television in 1951. And in its beginnings and popularity lies the source for many of the answers to these questions. Films ran a supportive parallel to early radio, projecting racial stereotypes. beginning from Birth of a Nation, the classic D.W. Griffith movie, which was released in 1915. Blacks in that film were portrayed either as brutes or as toms, buffoons and clown-like figures. Curiously, blacks weren't even hired to play those roles. White actors in blackface played the black characters, the shuffling darky type, the dim-witted coon, figures of fun and ridicule. Blacks didn't take Amos and Andy passively. In 1931, the Pittsburgh Courier, a black weekly, was unsuccessful in a drive to petition the Federal Radio Commission to cancel the program. Although the drive was unsuccessful, the points were made. It represented the exploitation of blacks for the commercial benefit of whites. The characters were detrimental to the self-respect and general advancement of black society, and the series placed business activities between blacks in a negative light.
When black actors entered the scene, in a few cases they did, they were forced to play these roles. So that I think in a whole, we can take the period from the early 20s up to the war years in the 1940s as being as a unit in which blacks were strongly stereotyped in the traditional roles we think of in film and we think of in literature. They were there also in radio.
Before we leave that period, what would a typical program be that would depict that era?
I think the paramount image, of course, is Amos and Andy, which emerged in the late 20s, took the country by storm in the early 30s, and continued on really until 1960 in various formats. Amos and Andy certainly filled the image. Amos was the nice, easygoing character, the Tom image. Andy Brown was the clown. He was oafish. He chased women. He never worked. A little later in the series, they developed George Kingfish Stevens, who was a cheat, sort of a rascal who was always out to con his friends at the Mystic Knights of the Sea Lodge Hall. We had Lightnin, the janitor, who was a dim-witted, easy, lethargic type. And all of them were played by white men. Freeman Gossett and Charles Correll played Amos and Andy and all the other voices, especially in its first years of mass popularity. Freeman Gossett and Charles Correll began their career in Chicago on radio station WGN as two blackface characters named Sam and Henry. The program was very popular in Chicago, ran for 2 years. There was even a comic strip in the Chicago Tribune, the newspaper that owned the station, called Sam and Henry. But when their contract was up in 1928, they couldn't come to agreement with the station, so they left, went across town to WGN, station affiliated with the Chicago Daily News newspaper. Here, they took the same act with them, but had to change their name. So no longer would they be known as Sam and Henry, they were now Amos and Andy. And beginning in Chicago then in 28, and eventually on the NBC network by 1929, Amos and Andy came to America.
Are the real voices of Amos and Andy and their associate characters, the same voices that you hear on the air each night. I hope you will look forward to seeing Amos and Doggy cartoons and that you will enjoy them thoroughly. Thank you, and here they are.
If I blue, if I blue, tell everybody around the place I is blue. Hello, Kingfish, come on in. Well, there's Andy asleep again. Andy, wake up. Andy.
Fresh Air Taxi Cab Company. President speaking.
Andy, wake up. The phone ain't ringing. You asleep.
I ain't been asleep.
Hello, boys. How is you?
Hello, Kingfish.
Well,
Boys, I got the greatest deal for you that you done ever heard of in your life.
you got a big deal, huh?
What is the deal, Kingfish?
Brother Andy, you wrestles bullneck moose steers for the championship of the world. If you wins the wrestling match, you is the king.
Hot dog. When do I wrestle?
You don't know nothing about wrestling.
What you know about what I know about? Where's the man I wrestle?
That's the stuff, Brother Andy.
You was wrong, Andy.
Shut up. I know what I done.
Come on over to the training quarters and start.
You was wrong, Andy. You was wrong.
Beulah was one of the more popular shows on radio from the middle 40s up into the 1950s. It featured the typical black maid, but what was untypical of Beulah was the fact that Beulah was played by a white man. a man named Marlon Hurt. And when Marlon Hurt died after the first year of his show, he was replaced by another white man. Only by 1947 did they finally sign Hattie McDaniel and then Lillian Randolph and Amanda Randolph to play the role on radio.
And what about the World War II period?
It's ironic that World War II should have a beneficial effect on anybody, but it really helped blacks in America, primarily because the enemy in World War II was a vicious, racist enemy. The Nazi superiority doctrine of the Aryan race and the inferiority of the non-Aryans, particularly the anti-Semitism, showed the world what could really happen when racism got fully out of control and came to control a country's culture and politics. In American propaganda, in fighting the war, it became counterproductive to say we are against racism when it was tolerated at home, when there were lynchings in the South, when there were consistent ridiculous images of blacks and other minorities in the screen, in radio and what all. So that we begin to see in the war years an important change, a transition where the more positive, more healthy, more realistic image of the American black emerges in broadcasting. In the post-war era, we had a cultural decision to make. Could the country go back to its old pre-war stereotypes, or had the liberal message of the war years really sunk in? And basically, the liberal image began to take its effect in the post-war period. In the post-war era, many important programs would emerge with all-black casts and directed specifically to illuminate black culture. WMCA in New York City had a program called New World A-Comin', based on a famous book by Roy Ottley. In Chicago, WMAQ produced Destination Freedom, a remarkable show which ran for 2 years, and in half-hour dramas enacted the lives of great black achievers. As we enter the 1950s, not only has the liberal message of World War II been retained to a great degree, but also the finances of the period begin to shift. The black consumer market, which had never really been there, begins to emerge in major cities. As by 1950, there were as many blacks in America as there were people living in the whole of Canada. So we have a $15 billion consumer force, black America, and it becomes very profitable for stations, for advertising agencies, for major companies now to begin to sell their products and make their pitch to this consumer force.
Are you saying that the new $80 billion consumer market among blacks has offset the old stereotypes of blacks? And are you saying that because the ad agencies were concerned about Southern whites buying products, that they then counsel their clients, the corporations, not to sponsor black programs?
No, what I'm talking about is that, especially in local programming, where an ad agency doing a program for New York City consumption didn't have to worry what people in other regions were going to say about the product, could get Pet Milk to sponsor the program, Philip Morris Cigarettes maybe would sponsor the program on a regional or local basis, so that we're not talking about national sponsorship now. Although certainly that came out. Nat King Cole had a radio show in 1946 sponsored by Wild Root Hair Tonic. That was a national program over the networks. But primarily on the local market, we begin to see the development of an attitude toward the black consumer that never was really there. And ultimately, our popular culture is one that is to a great degree determined by consumerism. If there is money there that could be utilized and that can be enticed into being spent on a certain product, a sponsor will go out and aim his particular ware or his particular product at that consumer force. And so what we have then is, by the early 50s, this major development in the black social structure in the United States that advertisers begin to appeal to. And out of that appeal comes much more mature programming, much more untypical images of blacks. In other words, realistic images of blacks. Written by Richard Durham, it was a show that dealt with black realities and did so in a very uncompromising fashion.
Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Destination Freedom. The Chicago Defender and station WMAQ bring you Destination Freedom, a new radio series dramatizing the great democratic traditions of the Negro people interwoven in the pageant of history and a part of America's own Destination Freedom.
It appeared on local radio in Chicago from 1948 to 1950. And Richard Durham wrote 97 scripts for the program that were actually aired. Perhaps the most dramatic statement ever made by an oppressed minority in American popular culture was on the program on Destination Freedom that dealt with the trial of Denmark Vesey. When Denmark Vesey stood up in the courtroom and said, "Until all men are free, the revolution goes on," you had a political punch that was very usually missing from American popular radio.
With some men free and some men slaves, I took up where they left off. I found my price when I was a slave. I paid it. If my life is the price I pay to be free, take it. I'll pay it. But until all men are free and equal, the revolution goes on.
During the period that you were producing Destination Freedom, it was certainly not an era of racial enlightenment. It was a very hostile racial climate. Amos and Andy was the #1 radio show in the country. And you presented these vignettes about black people, the history of black people, in dramatic form. Did you choose drama as a way to say what you really wanted to say? Was that the only avenue open to you to make the points that you made?
Exactly. It's strange that you mentioned Amos and Andy, because the very NBC official who is credited for introducing Amos and Andy to the networks, Miss Judith Waller, was the same one that introduced me to the networks and sponsored this show, Destination Freedom, which all of the officials acknowledged just by reading the scripts that they were going out on a big limb. They were fearful of what the reaction would be from the whites. After the first show, they stayed by the telephones and gave a report that 80% was against us. Nevertheless, as we had an excellent corps, which I must mention, of black actors. Oscar Brown Jr. at the time, Fred Pinkard, Janice Kingslow, Wesleyan Tilden, very mixed with the white actors. It was a mixed show. Excellent craftsmen. And our rating had shot up so high, while it may or may not have been true that the calls were against us, but they were listening to us. And that led us on. In fact, when the Chicago Defender, which had sponsored the original 13 shows, ran out of money, the station bought the show itself and sold the show as Destination Freedom because of the rating.
What phenomena are we identifying? What was going on in America during that time when blacks and whites, America in general, was just caught up in the Amos and Andy stereotypic, degrading, negative treatment of black people?
Well, American culture, as any culture, is very slow to change. The images that were popular in radio were the images that had been handed down for generations. The images of a country that owned slaves, that had to justify that ownership in terms of degrading images of the slave himself. He was seen as a child, he was seen as needing supervision, he was kept ignorant, so that we have the tradition of the racist past simply continuing on. I don't feel that it was an overt racism in the sense that people were viciously racist and said, this is the kind of show I want. I think it was a tradition, a pattern, and there wasn't enough information in the culture for mature people to change their mind. And importantly, too, the development of that black consumer force by the early 1950s makes it imperative that the stations, that the networks, the agencies, and what all begin to pitch their message toward black money, toward green power. You could probably say that it always was green power.
A better and more realistic image of blacks on radio and television is definitely on its way. As Dr. Fred McDonald said, our popular culture is one that is to a great degree determined by consumerism. That fact alone makes serious blacks more compatible with the sponsors' commercials, because the $100 billion spent each year by Afro-Americans are very compelling arguments. But serious black writers like Richard Durham and pioneering stations like WMAQ in Chicago didn't wait for times to change. They changed the times with the truth about a part of American history and lifestyles called black.